The sound of water stopped. 5 pairs of combat boots hit the wet tile floor in perfect rhythm, like a firing squad approaching position. Hazel Mercer stood motionless in the shower stall, water still dripping from her hair, towel wrapped tight around her small frame. She'd heard them coming 30 seconds ago, the deliberate footsteps in the hallway, the door lock clicking, the whispered coordination. She knew what this was. "Instructor Mercer." Sapphire Brennan's voice cut through the steam like a blade through silk. She stopped 3 paces away, arms crossed over her chest, shoulders squared in that arrogant stance only the truly entitled could pull off. Behind her, 4 other cadets fanned out in a perfect semicircle, blocking every exit, trapping her. "We need to talk." Hazel said nothing. She just stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on the floor, the posture of someone who knew they were outmatched, someone who had learned that silence was safer than speech, someone who had nothing to prove or everything to hide. Audrey Thornton stepped forward, her polished boots sending echoes through the tile room. 3 weeks. 3 weeks we've had to endure being instructed in tactical operations by someone with 0 military credentials. Her laugh was sharp, practiced. "My father is Admiral Thornton. My grandfather was Admiral Thornton. My family has served the Navy since 1945. She paused, letting that legacy hang in the steamy air. "And you're nobody." The word landed like a punch. "Nobody." K.H. Low Winters moved closer, her technical mind calculating angles even now. No combat record, no officer training, no documentation of any service whatsoever. Her voice carried the cold precision of someone used to being the smartest person in any room, just some civilian who got lucky enough to be placed here by someone with influence. The way she emphasized lucky made it clear what she really meant. Delilah Vaughn, positioned nearest the door like a sentinel, added her voice to the chorus. "My father runs intelligence operations across 3 theaters. He knows how to vet people. When I told him about you, he laughed, said you didn't even show up in basic background checks." Hazel's fingers tightened on the edge of her towel, but her eyes, in that brief moment when they flickered across the 5 women, held something that didn't match her submissive posture. Too alert, too measured, like she was counting distances, calculating reaction times, assessing threat levels. But none of them noticed. Emerald Kane, the youngest at 21, spoke up from her position by the shower controls. "People like you don't belong here. You're making a mockery of everything this academy stands for." The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive. Steam continued to rise from the shower heads, creating a fog that made the scene feel surreal, disconnected from reality. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed. Voices echoed in another hallway. Life continued normally everywhere else on base. But not here. Not in this moment. Sapphire took another step closer, close enough that Hazel could see the certainty in her eyes, the absolute conviction that she held all the power here. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to resign. You're going to walk into Colonel Brennan's office tomorrow morning and tell him you're not qualified for this position, that you made a mistake, that you're leaving." For the first time, Hazel lifted her eyes, met Sapphire's gaze directly. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, almost gentle. "No." The single word landed like a grenade. Sapphire's face flushed red. "Excuse me." "I said no." Hazel's voice remained calm, steady. No anger, no fear, just simple statement of fact. "I'm not resigning." Audrey laughed, but there was an edge to it now, an uncertainty. "You think you have a choice. You think you can stand against all of us, against our families, against everything we represent." "I think," Hazel said softly, "that you should leave now, before this goes somewhere none of you want it to go." The threat, if it could even be called that, was delivered so quietly, so gently, that it almost seemed absurd. This small woman, outnumbered 5-1, cornered in a shower room with no backup and no way out, telling them to leave. K.H. Low's eyes narrowed. Something wasn't adding up. The confidence didn't match the circumstances, unless... But before she could finish that thought, Sapphire moved. What happened next would become the stuff of legend at Fort Reynolds. But what nobody knew yet, what these 5 entitled cadets couldn't possibly understand, was that they just cornered one of the most dangerous people on the planet. A woman who'd spent 12 years operating in the darkest corners of the world. A warrior who'd earned her place in history through blood and sacrifice. They thought they knew who she was. They had no idea. 8 weeks earlier, Hazel had arrived at Fort Reynolds Training Academy in Virginia with a single duffel bag and a letter of assignment signed by someone whose name had been redacted from every copy. She'd walked through the main gate at 700 hours, shown her civilian credentials to the guard, and been directed to the administrative building without ceremony. No welcome committee, no orientation. Just a key to a small office in the physical training complex, and a schedule that started the next morning. Colonel Archer Brennan had met with her privately that first afternoon. He was 58, with the kind of weathered face that came from 3 decades of military service and the weight of command. He'd closed his office door, pulled the blinds, and sat across from her with his hands folded on the desk. "I know who you are, Commander," he'd said quietly. "I know what you did. I know why you're here." Hazel had nodded once, said nothing. What was there to say? "I agreed to this arrangement because I respect what you've sacrificed for this country, but you need to understand something." He'd leaned forward. "This academy is full of cadets from military families, legacy admissions, 3rd and 4th generation officers. They're going to look at your civilian credentials and your GS-7 pay grade, and they're going to make assumptions." "I know. Can you handle that? Can you stay quiet? Because if your identity comes out..." He'd left the sentence unfinished. They both knew what would happen. Hazel had met his eyes steadily. "I just want to be left alone. I want to teach basic PT and tactical fundamentals to people who need it. That's all. No recognition, no acknowledgement. That's the point, sir." Brennan had studied her for a long moment. Then he'd stood, extended his hand. "Welcome to Fort Reynolds, Instructor Mercer. I hope you find what you're looking for here." But what Hazel was looking for, peace, anonymity, a quiet place to heal from wounds that went deeper than scars, was exactly what Fort Reynolds couldn't provide. The first PT session had started innocently enough. 23 cadets assembled on the parade ground at 600 hours, most of them still rubbing sleep from their eyes. Hazel had stood at the front in standard-issue workout gear, looking impossibly small next to the fit, confident young men and women before her. Sapphire had been there from day one. She'd taken one look at Hazel's civilian name tag and smirked. "We're being trained by a contractor. Seriously." Hazel had ignored the comment. "We'll start with a 3-mile run, standard pace, stay together as a group." "What's your mile time, instructor?" This from K.H. Lowe, already establishing dominance through technical knowledge. "Just so we know what standard pace means to you." Fast enough, Hazel had turned toward the running track. "Let's move." The run itself had been revealing. Hazel had maintained position at the front of the pack, her breathing steady, her stride efficient. Too efficient. Several of the cadets who'd started out dismissive found themselves struggling to keep up with the civilian contractor who ran like someone intimately familiar with forced marches and tactical movement. Mason Pierce, one of the few cadets who stayed neutral in the social warfare that followed, had noticed it immediately. The way she ran wasn't athletic. It was operational, economy of movement, constant environmental awareness, head on a swivel even during routine exercise. But when Sapphire had challenged her afterward, "Lucky run, instructor, hope you can keep up with us when it matters," Hazel had just nodded and walked away. Silent, submissive, exactly what they expected. The mess hall incident happened on day 5. Hazel had been sitting alone at a corner table, eating quickly and quietly, when Sapphire and her group made their entrance. The mess hall held over 200 people, cadets, instructors, support staff, and everyone saw what happened next. Sapphire walked directly to Hazel's table, didn't ask permission, just sat down across from her, flanked by her 4 loyal followers. "We've been talking," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "and we're concerned about the quality of instruction we're receiving." Hazel continued eating, didn't look up. "I mean no offense, but you're a civilian contractor teaching military tactics. It's like having a car mechanic teach brain surgery." Laughter from her group. A few awkward chuckles from other tables. "We're just wondering what qualifies you to be here. What's your background? Where did you serve?" Hazel set down her fork, met Sapphire's eyes. "I'm qualified." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." The tension at the table was palpable. Sapphire leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried further than if she'd shouted. "My uncle is Colonel Brennan, the man who runs this academy, and between you and me, I don't think he knows what a fraud you are. Yet." Hazel stood, picked up her tray, walked to the disposal area without another word, leaving Sapphire sitting there, victory written all over her face. The message was clear to everyone watching. Instructor Mercer was weak, afraid, someone who could be pushed around. They had no idea how wrong they were. Over the next 3 weeks, the bullying escalated. Subtle at first, whispered comments during formations, deliberate slowness following her instructions, questions designed to embarrass rather than educate. "Instructor, can you show us the proper way to field strip a weapon? Oh wait, you probably don't know. Never mind." Hazel endured it all in silence, never raised her voice, never threatened, never retaliated. She just kept showing up, kept teaching, kept maintaining that quiet, humble demeanor that they mistook for weakness. But there were moments, brief flashes, when something else showed through. When a cadet named Connor Hayes twisted his ankle during an obstacle course, Hazel had been there in seconds. Her hands had moved with practiced precision, assessing the injury, stabilizing the joint, barking orders to other cadets with a command voice that came from somewhere deep and automatic. For 30 seconds, she wasn't the meek civilian contractor. She was someone else entirely. Then the moment passed. She'd helped Connor to the medical station, returned to her quiet demeanor, and the incident was forgotten. Almost. K.H. Lowe had noticed. Her analytical mind filed it away. The speed of response, the medical knowledge, the command presence that appeared and disappeared like a switch being flipped. It didn't fit the profile of a simple civilian contractor, but what did it fit? The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday morning during hand-to-hand combat training. Hazel was demonstrating a basic defensive technique, how to escape a rear chokehold, when Sapphire volunteered to be her partner. "I want to see if this actually works," she'd announced to the assembled class. Hazel had hesitated just for a second, then nodded. Sapphire had applied the chokehold with more force than necessary. Hazel had executed the escape exactly as she'd been teaching it, clean, efficient, professional, but Sapphire hadn't let go, had tightened her grip instead, turning the demonstration into something else. A power play, a challenge. "Come on, instructor," Sapphire had whispered in her ear, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Show us what you've got, or can't you handle it?" Hazel had gone still, completely still. That predatory stillness that animals recognize as danger. For 3 seconds, everyone watching felt the temperature in the room drop, felt something ancient and lethal rise to the surface, felt the presence of someone who'd survived things these cadets couldn't imagine. Then Hazel had tapped out, submitted, let Sapphire win. The class had erupted in mocking laughter. Sapphire had released her grip, stepped back with arms raised in victory. "And that's why civilians shouldn't teach military tactics," she'd announced. Hazel had simply nodded. "Good demonstration. Everyone partner up and practice the technique." She'd walked to the edge of the mat, stood with her back to the class. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from restraint. from the effort of not doing what every instinct screamed at her to do, from not revealing who she really was, what she'd really done. Mason had seen her face in that moment, seen something that made him take an involuntary step back, something that made him wonder if they'd all made a terrible mistake. But the moment passed. Hazel composed herself, turned back to the class with that same gentle, defeated expression, and the training continued. That night alone in her small apartment off base, Hazel had stood in the shower for 40 minutes. Let the water run cold. Let it wash away the memories that the chokehold had triggered. Syria, the ambush, her teammates dying around her, the 13 hours of combat that had earned her the Medal of Honor she'd never publicly accepted. She'd come to Fort Reynolds to escape those memories, to be someone normal, someone unremarkable, someone who didn't carry the weight of classified operations and dead brothers in arms. But the past had a way of finding you, even when you ran, even when you hid. Especially when you hid. The next morning she'd submitted her first incident report to Colonel Brennan: professional harassment, hostile work environment. She documented everything with the same precision she'd once used for after-action reports. Sapphire's name appeared 17 times, Audrey's 12, K.H. Lowe's 8. Brennan had read it in silence, then looked up at her with sad, knowing eyes. "You want me to handle this?" "No, sir, I just wanted it on record. You could end this tomorrow. One word from you, and they'd spend the rest of their careers apologizing." "That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here, Commander?" Hazel had thought about that question for a long time. "Because I'm tired of being Ghost 7. I'm tired of being the legend. I'm tired of carrying the weight of dead teammates and classified medals and operations that can never be acknowledged. I just want to be Hazel Mercer, someone normal, someone forgettable." "You're many things," Brennan had said quietly, "but forgettable isn't one of them." He'd been right. 3 days later she'd been cornered in the showers, 5 against 1, trapped, outnumbered, supposedly powerless. And that's when everything changed. When Sapphire lunged forward, trying to grab the towel, trying to humiliate, trying to break, Hazel moved. Not with the hesitant, defensive movements of a frightened civilian, but with the lethal precision of someone who'd survived 12 years in the world's most dangerous places. She'd sidestepped Sapphire's grab, redirected her momentum, and had the cadet face down on the wet tile in under 2 seconds. One hand controlling Sapphire's wrist. One knee applying just enough pressure to the small of her back to keep her immobilized. No excessive force, no anger, just pure, efficient control. The 4 other cadets had frozen, stared, tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Hazel's voice, when she spoke, was still quiet, still calm, but now it carried an edge that none of them had heard before. "I'm going to let you up now, and then you're all going to leave, and we're never going to speak of this again." Audrey had found her voice first. "You assaulted a superior officer's daughter. You're finished." "No," Hazel said. "You cornered an instructor in a shower room, blocked the exits, made verbal threats. And when your ringleader attempted to physically assault me, I defended myself using appropriate and measured force." She paused. "There are cameras in this hallway, audio recording. Everything from the moment you locked that door is documented." The color drained from Sapphire's face. "So here's what's actually going to happen," Hazel continued. "You're going to get up. You're all going to walk out of here. Tomorrow morning, you're going to apologize publicly for 3 weeks of harassment, and then you're going to be model cadets for the rest of your time at this academy." K.H. Lowe's mind was racing. The technique Hazel had just used wasn't something you learned in a weekend self-defense class. That was Krav Maga, or SEAL close quarters combat training, or something worse. "Who are you?" she whispered. Hazel released Sapphire, stood, adjusted her towel. "I'm exactly who I've always been, you just weren't paying attention." She walked past them, out of the shower room, down the hallway, left them standing there in the steam trying to understand what had just happened. The next morning, Colonel Brennan called an emergency assembly. Every cadet in the academy, every instructor, every staff member, over 400 people packed into the main auditorium, whispering, speculating about what warranted this kind of gathering. Hazel stood backstage, heart-pounding. Brennan had given her a choice: continue hiding or step into the light, own who she was, what she'd done, the sacrifices she'd made. "It's time," Brennan had said. "Not for them, for you." Now she waited in the wings, listening as Brennan took the podium, watching the confused faces of the cadets who'd spent 3 weeks mocking her, tormenting her, underestimating her. "3 years ago," Brennan began, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium, "a SEAL team designated Ghost 7 was operating in northern Syria. Their mission was classified then. It remains classified now. What I can tell you is that the operation went sideways. The team came under fire from a much larger enemy force. 13 hours of sustained combat. No air support. No extraction available. 4 SEALs against over 50 enemy combatants." The auditorium was silent, absolutely silent. By the time reinforcements arrived, 3 members of Ghost 7 were dead. One had survived. That survivor had single-handedly held their position, coordinated friendly forces, and executed a tactical withdrawal while carrying 2 wounded Marines she'd encountered during the firefight. She killed 23 enemy combatants, saved 7 American lives, and earned the Medal of Honor. Brennan paused, let that sink in. The survivor's name was redacted from all official records at her request because she didn't want recognition, didn't want fame. She wanted to grieve her teammates in private, to heal away from the spotlight, to be something other than a legend. He turned toward the wings, made eye contact with Hazel. She could still walk away, could still refuse, could still hide. But she'd been hiding for 3 years, and she was tired, so tired. She stepped onto the stage. The moment the cadets saw her, small, unassuming Instructor Mercer walking toward the podium, the auditorium erupted. Not in applause, in shock, in disbelief, in the horrified realization of what they'd done, who they'd dismissed, who they'd mocked. Sapphire sat in the 3rd row, frozen. Her face had gone pale. Around her, Audrey, K.H. Lowe, Delilah, and Emerald looked equally stricken. They'd cornered a Medal of Honor recipient in a shower room, had threatened her, had tried to force her resignation, had called her nobody. "This," Brennan said, gesturing to Hazel, "is Commander Hazel Mercer. Call sign Ghost 7, 12 years of service in naval special warfare, 3 tour in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, 1 in Syria. And for the past 8 weeks, she's been teaching you basic physical training and tactical fundamentals, while enduring harassment, mockery, and disrespect from cadets who assumed that because she didn't advertise her credentials, she didn't have any." He let that statement hang in the air, let it sink into every person in that auditorium. "Commander Mercer is going to speak to you now, and I expect you to extend her the respect she earned a long time ago, the respect she should have received from day one, the respect that real warriors give each other, regardless of rank or background or family name." Brennan stepped aside. Hazel took the podium, looked out at 400 faces, some ashamed, some awed, some still processing. She took a breath, and for the first time in 3 years she spoke not as a civilian contractor trying to hide, but as herself. "I didn't want this," she began. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I didn't want recognition. I didn't want you to know. I came here because I was broken, because I watched my teammates die and I survived and I didn't know how to live with that. Because every time someone called me a hero, it felt like a knife in my chest, because real heroes are the ones who don't come home." The silence was deafening. "I came here to disappear, to be normal, to teach young men and women the basics of physical fitness and tactical awareness without anyone knowing what I'd done or who I'd been. I came here to heal." She paused, met Sapphire's eyes across the auditorium. The young woman was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. And for 8 weeks I've been harassed, mocked, dismissed, told I didn't belong, that I was nobody, that I was making a mockery of everything this academy stands for. Her voice never rose, never hardened. She stated facts, nothing more. And I took it, not because I was weak, not because I couldn't defend myself, but because I understood something that many of you don't yet understand. She leaned forward, spoke directly to every person in that room. Real strength isn't about proving yourself. It's not about dominating others or advertising your credentials or demanding respect based on your family name. Real strength is having the power to destroy someone and choosing mercy instead. Real strength is enduring injustice because you understand that responding with force isn't always the right answer. Real strength is being the most dangerous person in the room and never letting anyone know it. Her words cut deeper than any rebuke, struck harder than any punishment. I could have ended the harassment at any time. One word to Colonel Brennan, one demonstration of what I'm actually capable of, one revelation of who I really am, but I didn't, because I wanted to see who you really were, not who you pretend to be when someone's watching, not who your family name says you should be, but who you are when you think there are no consequences, when you think you're dealing with someone powerless. Mason, sitting in the back row, felt tears in his own eyes. He'd sensed something was wrong, had felt uncomfortable with the way Sapphire and her group treated Instructor Mercer, but he hadn't said anything, hadn't stood up, hadn't defended her. He'd failed the test too. Some of you failed that test, Hazel continued. You showed me that when given power over someone you perceive as weaker, you abuse it. You showed me that your respect is conditional, based on rank, credentials, family connections, that you only treat people well when they can hurt you back. She paused, let that sink in. But here's the thing about respect, real respect, the kind that matters. It's not something you demand. It's not something you inherit. It's not something your family name earns for you. It's something you give freely to every person you meet, regardless of their position or background or ability to hurt you. Because that's what honor means. That's what integrity means. That's what service means. The auditorium remained silent, but now it was a different kind of silence, reflective, ashamed, transformed. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you this because you need to understand what kind of officers you're going to become if you don't change. The military isn't about family legacy or personal glory. It's about serving something larger than yourself, protecting people who can't protect themselves, making sacrifices without expecting recognition, leading with humility instead of arrogance. Her voice softened, became almost gentle. My teammates who died in Syria, Marcus, Alicia, David, they were the best people I've ever known. They gave everything for this country, and most people will never know their names, never know what they did, never understand what they sacrificed. That's the reality of service, real service, the kind that matters. She looked directly at Sapphire again, then at Audrey, K.H. Lowe, Delilah, Emerald. You five cornered me in a shower room yesterday, tried to force my resignation, tried to humiliate me, and when I defended myself, with far less force than I could have used, far less than you deserved, you were shocked, confused, couldn't understand how the weak civilian contractor could handle herself. Her voice remained steady, calm. But here's what I want you to understand. I don't hate you for what you did. I don't even blame you, because you're young. You're products of a system that taught you that power and privilege are more important than character. That family name matters more than personal integrity. That respect is something you demand rather than earn. She took a breath. So I'm going to make you an offer. The same offer I wish someone had made me when I was your age and just as arrogant. You can learn from this. You can grow. You can become the kind of officers this country actually needs. Leaders who serve rather than command, who lift others up rather than tear them down, who understand that real strength is measured not by who you can defeat but by who you choose to protect. The transformation in the room was palpable. Cadets who'd been slouching sat up straighter, Eyes that had been defiant or ashamed now held something else: determination, understanding, hope. "The choice is yours," Hazel concluded. "You can let this moment define you negatively, can carry shame and resentment, can blame me for exposing your failures, or you can let it transform you, can choose to become better, can understand that growth comes from acknowledging mistakes and working to fix them." She stepped back from the podium, looked at Colonel Brennan. He nodded, gave her a small, proud smile. "That's all I have to say. Thank you for listening." The applause started slowly. One person in the back row, then another, then a dozen. Then the entire auditorium rose to its feet, 400 people standing, clapping, many crying openly, not because they'd been inspired by a rousing speech, but because they'd been confronted with uncomfortable truth and given a path forward, because someone they dismissed and mocked had shown them more grace than they deserved. Because real strength, they were finally learning, looked nothing like they'd imagined. In the weeks that followed, Fort Reynolds underwent a transformation. It wasn't immediate, wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Cadets who'd participated in the harassment, not just Sapphire's group, but dozens of others who'd laughed along, who'd contributed to the hostile environment, who'd stayed silent when they should have spoken up, sought Hazel out privately, apologized, asked for guidance. Sapphire had been the first. She'd knocked on Hazel's office door 3 days after the assembly, stood at attention, and delivered an apology that was clearly rehearsed but no less sincere for it. "Ma'am, I have no excuse for my behavior. I was cruel, arrogant, and wrong. I let my family name convince me I was entitled to treat you or anyone with disrespect. I'm sorry." Hazel had listened, nodded, apology accepted. Sapphire had started to leave, then turned back. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why didn't you fight back? When I had you in that chokehold during training, you could have, I know that now, so why didn't you?" Hazel had considered the question carefully. "Because breaking you in front of your peers would have taught you that might makes right. That power is what matters. I wanted you to learn a different lesson." "What lesson?" "That restraint is stronger than retaliation. That choosing not to hurt someone, even when you can, is the real measure of a warrior." Sapphire had left with tears in her eyes, but she'd come back the next day, and the day after that. Slowly, tentatively, she'd begun the work of becoming someone different, someone better. The others followed. Audrey, struggling with the weight of family expectations. K.H. Lowe, learning that intelligence without empathy is just cruelty with better vocabulary. Delilah, understanding that her father's position didn't define her worth. Emerald, the youngest, desperate to prove she wasn't just following the crowd but capable of independent thought and moral courage. Hazel worked with them all, patiently, without judgment, teaching them not just tactical skills but something more fundamental: how to be human beings worth following. She also found allies she hadn't expected. Mason Pierce became one of her most dedicated students, working twice as hard to make up for his earlier silence. Connor Hayes, the cadet who'd twisted his ankle, organized a study group focused on Hazel's teachings, not just the physical skills but the philosophy behind them. And slowly, word spread beyond Fort Reynolds. Other training facilities heard about the civilian contractor who turned out to be a Medal of Honor recipient, about her approach to teaching, her philosophy of servant leadership, her refusal to let harassment break her. Requests came in for her to speak at other academies, to train other instructors, to share her methodology. She declined most of them. This wasn't about building a reputation or establishing a legacy. This was still about healing, about finding purpose after loss, about honoring her fallen teammates by teaching the next generation to be better than she'd been. But there were moments, quiet moments alone in her office or apartment, when the memories still came, when she'd close her eyes and see Marcus's face, Alicia's laugh, David's focused concentration during mission planning, the brothers and sisters she'd lost in Syria, the weight of surviving when they hadn't. One evening, 2 months after the assembly, she sat in her apartment staring at a bottle of whiskey. She'd been 3 years sober, 3 years fighting the urge to numb the pain, 3 years learning to feel everything, the grief, the guilt, the rage, the sorrow, without trying to drown it. Her phone rang, unknown number. Commander Mercer. The voice was male, professional, with a slight southern accent. "Who is this?" "Dylan Rivera. I served with Marcus Webb. We were in Afghanistan together before Syria." Her heart stopped. "How did you get this number?" "Marcus gave it to me, before the Syria mission. Said if anything ever happened to him I should check on you, make sure you were okay. I'm sorry it took me 3 years to call." Tears she'd been holding back suddenly broke free. "He's gone. They're all gone." "I know, I read the classified reports, all of them. What you did that day, what you survived." His voice cracked. "Marcus would be proud of you." "I couldn't save them." "You saved 7 other people. You completed the mission. You did everything humanly possible and then some. Marcus knew the risks. They all did. And they chose to be there anyway because they believed in the work, in each other, in you." She wiped her eyes, stared at the whiskey bottle, slowly pushed it away. "Why are you calling now?" "Because a mutual friend told me you were teaching at Fort Reynolds, that you were doing good work. And I wanted you to know that what you're doing matters. Teaching these kids to be better leaders, better human beings. That's honoring Marcus and the others more than any medal or ceremony ever could." They talked for 2 hours. Dylan shared stories about Marcus she'd never heard. Funny moments, difficult missions, the philosophy that had shaped him as a leader. By the end of the call, Hazel felt lighter. Not healed. She'd never be fully healed, but less alone. "There's a gathering every year," Dylan said before hanging up. "SEAL teams who have lost members. We meet in Virginia Beach. Share stories. Remember the fallen. You should come." "I don't know if I'm ready." "You don't have to be ready. You just have to show up. Marcus would want you there." She promised to think about it. And for the first time in 3 years, she actually meant it. The semester continued. Christmas approached. Fort Reynolds took on a festive atmosphere, decorations in common areas, increased leave requests, cadets excited to return home for the holidays. But there was an undercurrent of change, a subtle shift in culture that everyone could feel but few could articulate. Respect had become the default rather than the exception. Cadets helped each other instead of competing destructively. Instructors noticed fewer disciplinary issues, more genuine camaraderie, deeper engagement with the material being taught. And at the center of it all was the quiet civilian contractor, who taught them something more valuable than tactics or techniques. She taught them how to be human beings worth leading. On the last day before winter break, Sapphire approached Hazel one final time. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For not destroying me when you had the chance. For giving me the opportunity to become someone better. For teaching me that strength isn't about power, it's about character." Hazel smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "You did the work yourself, I just showed you the path." "Will you be here next semester?" "That's the plan." Sapphire nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Does it get easier, the guilt, the memories?" Hazel thought about that question, about the nightmares that still came, the moments of panic, the faces she saw every time she closed her eyes. "No," she said honestly. "It doesn't get easier, but you get stronger. You learn to carry it. And eventually, you learn to live alongside it instead of underneath it." Sapphire nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty." "That's all we have, Sapphire, truth and integrity. Everything else is just noise." After Sapphire left, Hazel stood at her office window, watching cadets stream toward the parking lot, heading home for the holidays. She thought about her own apartment, empty and quiet, about spending Christmas alone like she had for the past 3 years, about the invitation Dylan had extended. She picked up her phone, dialed. "Dylan, it's Hazel, about that gathering in Virginia Beach. I think I'm ready." His voice carried genuine warmth. Marcus would be happy to hear that. "I know, that's why I'm going." 3 weeks later, Hazel stood in a small gathering of SEAL veterans, listening to stories about teammates lost in combat. Some of the faces were familiar, others were strangers, but they all shared the same expression, the haunted look of people who'd survived when others hadn't, the weight of living on borrowed time. She contributed her own stories, talked about Marcus's terrible jokes, Alicia's competitive streak, David's obsessive mission planning, and for the first time, speaking about them didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like honoring, like keeping them alive in the only way that mattered, through memory and story and the lessons they'd taught. Afterward, an older SEAL, Vietnam era, judging by his age, approached her. "You're Ghost 7. I was. I read about Syria, what you did, what you survived." He paused. "My son was one of the Marines you carried out. James Morrison. He speaks about you sometimes, says you saved his life." Hazel felt tears sting her eyes. She remembered James, remembered finding him and another Marine pinned down, wounded, separated from their unit. Remembered making the decision to protect them even though it meant staying in the kill zone longer. "He saved mine too, gave me a reason to keep fighting." The old SEAL nodded. "He's getting married next spring. He'd like you to be there, if you're comfortable with that." She realized with surprise that she genuinely was. "I'd be honored." They talked for another hour. He shared stories about his son's recovery, his struggle with PTSD, his eventual healing. And Hazel shared her own journey, the 3 years of isolation, the teaching position at Fort Reynolds, the slow, painful process of learning to live again. "You're doing important work," he told her, "teaching these kids, not just tactics but values, character, that matters more than anything." "Some days it feels like enough, others," she trailed off. "Others you wonder if you should have died with your team." She looked at him sharply. He understood. Of course he understood. Every combat veteran who'd lost teammates understood. "It's not about deserving to live," he said quietly. "It's about honoring their sacrifice by living well, by being the kind of person they died protecting, by making the world better in whatever small way you can." His words stayed with her long after the gathering ended, long after she returned to Fort Reynolds, long after the spring semester began and she found herself once again standing before a new class of eager, nervous, overconfident cadets. She looked at them, these young men and women who had no idea what they were getting into, what sacrifices military service would demand, what losses they might face, and she felt something shift inside her. Purpose. Not the desperate running away from pain purpose that had brought her here, but genuine, forward-looking purpose. The desire to prepare them, protect them, give them the tools to survive and thrive and become the leaders this country needed. "My name is Hazel Mercer," she began. "And before we start, I want to tell you something important. Respect in this classroom isn't based on rank, credentials, or family name. It's based on character, on how you treat people when you think no one's watching, on whether you choose kindness or cruelty, integrity or convenience, service or selfishness." She paused, let that sink in. "Some of you will love me, some of you will hate me, some of you will dismiss me as just another instructor, but all of you will be treated with dignity and respect. And in return, I expect you to treat each other and me the same way. Not because I'm a Medal of Honor recipient, not because of what I've done or who I've been, but because that's the standard we're setting here. That's the culture we're building. That's the kind of officers we're training." In the back row, a young woman named Daisy Blake sat up straighter. Something in Instructor Mercer's tone, in her quiet confidence, in the way she commanded the room without raising her voice, resonated deeply. This was different. This was real. This was worth paying attention to. The semester progressed. Hazel taught tactical skills and physical conditioning, but she also taught something harder to quantify: how to lead with humility, how to make hard decisions under pressure, how to prioritize mission and team over ego and glory. Some cadets embraced it immediately. Others resisted. A few dropped out, unable or unwilling to meet the standard. But those who stayed changed, grew, became versions of themselves they hadn't known were possible. Sapphire, now in her final semester, served as an informal mentor to younger cadets. She shared her story openly: how she'd harassed instructor Mercer, how she'd learned the hard way what real strength looked like, how she was still working every day to become someone worthy of the uniform she'd wear. Mason organized leadership workshops focused on Hazel's teachings. Connor, fully recovered from his ankle injury, led physical training sessions that emphasized teamwork over individual achievement. And slowly, Fort Reynolds became known for producing a different kind of officer: still skilled, still competent, but also humble, empathetic, focused on service rather than glory. Hazel watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. This was her legacy: not the Medal of Honor, not the classified missions, not the legend of Ghost 7. These young men and women who were learning to lead with integrity, who were carrying forward the values Marcus and Alicia and David had died for. On a warm spring evening, she received an email: James Morrison's wedding invitation. She RSVP'd yes immediately. 2 weeks later, she stood in a small church in North Carolina, watching the Marine she'd saved marry his sweetheart, surrounded by family and friends who had no idea about Syria, about the 13 hours of hell, about what it had cost to bring him home. During the reception, James found her. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me. I know it's not easy, being around people, crowds, celebrations when," he didn't finish, didn't need to. "It's getting easier," she said, and meant it. "Your father told me about your recovery. I'm proud of you." "I'm proud of you too. Teaching, making a difference, that takes a different kind of courage." They talked about Syria, about the other Marine who'd been with him, Sarah Chen, who'd also survived and was now working as a trauma surgeon in Baltimore, about the nightmares that still came but were less frequent now, about learning to accept that survival wasn't a punishment but an opportunity. "Marcus would be proud of you," James said suddenly. "I never met him, but from what I've heard, from what you've told me, he'd be proud of what you're doing." Hazel felt tears sting her eyes but didn't fight them. "I think so too." She left the wedding feeling lighter than she had in years, drove back to Fort Reynolds through the night, windows down, music playing softly, no longer running from her past but carrying it with her, learning to integrate it, to let it make her stronger instead of breaking her. The following Monday, Colonel Brennan called her into his office. "I have news." Her heart sank. She knew that tone. Bad news. "Depends on your perspective." He slid a folder across the desk. "You've been offered a position at Naval Special Warfare Command, training development, teaching instructors how to teach, shaping the entire curriculum for SEAL preparation programs." She stared at the folder without opening it. "And if I decline?" "Then you continue here at Fort Reynolds. Same position, same responsibilities, same quiet anonymity you came here seeking." "What would you do?" Brennan smiled. "I'd ask myself what Marcus would want me to do, what Alicia and David would want, not what's easier or safer, but what serves the most people, what makes the biggest difference." She opened the folder. Read the details. The position would require relocation, would put her back in the spotlight to some degree, would mean working with active duty SEALs again, confronting memories and relationships she'd spent 3 years avoiding. But it would also mean shaping how thousands of future operators were trained, ensuring they learned not just tactics but values, character, the lessons her teammates had died teaching her. "Can I have time to think about it?" "You have 2 weeks, but Hazel," he waited until she met his eyes, You came here broken, looking for a place to hide, and you found it. But you're not that person anymore. You've healed, grown, and now you have a choice: stay in the safe harbor you've built or venture back out to see where you're needed most. She thought about it for 12 days, consulted with Dylan, with James, with several of her students, sat in her office at Fort Reynolds, looked at the photos on her wall, her old SEAL team, her current students, the life she'd built here. On the 13th day, she made her decision. She called Brennan. "I'm accepting the position." "I thought you might. When do you leave?" 6 weeks, enough time to finish the semester, say proper goodbyes. "The academy will miss you." "I'll miss it too, but this is what Marcus would want, what they all would want." The final 6 weeks passed quickly. Hazel wrapped up her classes, wrote detailed transition notes for her replacement, met individually with students who needed guidance. Sapphire and her former tormentors threw her a small going-away party, awkward at first, then genuinely warm as stories were shared and lessons remembered. On her last day, she stood before the assembled academy one final time. Over 400 people, just like that first assembly, but different now, changed. "When I came here," she began, "I was running from pain, from memories, from the weight of survival. I wanted to disappear, to be forgotten, to find peace in anonymity." She paused, looked across the faces staring back at her. "But you wouldn't let me. You challenged me, tested me. Some of you tormented me, and in doing so, you forced me to confront who I was and who I wanted to become. You gave me back my purpose." Her voice softened. "I'm leaving Fort Reynolds to take a position training SEAL instructors, but I'm taking all of you with me. The lessons we learned together, the culture we built, the understanding that real strength comes from character, not credentials, that leadership means service, not command, that the quietest person in the room might be the most dangerous and the most worth following." She took a breath. "I told you once that my teammates died so others could live, that their sacrifice demanded something from me. I thought that meant punishing myself, isolating, carrying guilt like a burden that could never be put down. But you taught me differently. You taught me that honoring their sacrifice means living fully, teaching others, making the world better in whatever way I can." She looked directly at Sapphire, at Audrey, Khlo, Delilah, Emerald. "Even those who hurt me taught me something valuable. They taught me that people can change, that grace is more powerful than revenge, that choosing mercy over justice sometimes creates better outcomes than punishment ever could." She smiled. "So thank you, all of you, for giving me back my life, for reminding me that I'm more than Ghost 7, that I'm Hazel Mercer, a teacher, a friend, a human being learning to live again." The applause was thunderous, but she barely heard it. She was looking at her students, at the culture they'd built together, at the legacy that would continue long after she left. Service doesn't seek recognition. Real warriors don't advertise. The quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.